Thank you. Jonathan, you have two workshops you led today, the peer-led and peer focus groups, as well as the laws and public policy.
Thank you. So the peer-led program, we heard from Tom DeShawn and Ken Dodge. And you'll recall we started talking about aggressive behavior and distinguishing that bullying between proactive and reactive aggression, and that bullying is proactive, and I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. I think what was also an important sort of theme that emerged is that while we often see this deviant behavior from our perspective as problematic and that's it, or problematic and harmful, in the space of youth interactions, as Tom DeShawn said, in fact, it's deviant talk and aggression is used to talk to friends. We saw in the first morning Bob Farris's work showing that aggression actually helps achieve higher status. And so we have to remember that there's some value in the aggressive behavior for youth. And so that doesn't suggest that we shouldn't address it, but that we need to think about how we go about addressing it. We did hear from both of them thoughts on what works, and that there is evidence on what works and what doesn't work. And we heard quite clearly that the most common response is to place a deviant child with other deviant children and focus on group work. And as they both indicated, that seems to produce some of the worst outcomes. So we ought to try to avoid that whenever possible. Next, we heard that interventions that support adult involvement, positive relationships, and group management skills are likely to have positive effects on problem behavior, as well as reduce peer contagion and coercion. We also heard that interventions that promote self-regulation in youth can have positive effects. And hitting upon a theme that we heard emphasized by a number of the youth panelists, that instilling non-aggressive norms, creating universal peer culture interventions is really a critical step, and those efforts are likely to have positive effects. Two final points I'll make on the peer panel is one is sort of the moving upstream point that Tom made, that the idea of if you can prevent the self-organization of youth into gangs in the first place, and Asher highlighted this sort of early intervention concept in the youth panel, that's really, you have much better success rates than trying to deal with things after that gang that sort of aggressive culture has formed. And last, we heard when we started talking about a peer-led versus peer-focus, the need for ongoing evaluation with all programs. So I will turn it over to me now.
To talk about laws and public policies.
Thank you. All right, so laws, what we heard is that there's really significant activity at the legislative level in the last decade. And that presents a host of challenges. One is we have legislatures that are really interested, but they're moving very quickly and not always with all the evidence that we think is out there, or that they should at least consider. We heard from Mark Hatzenbuehler that there's great variations across states, but also that it's important to note that the variations exist not only among states, but among counties and actually within counties, because so many of the laws foremost delegate authority to school boards and to schools to establish policies. So the variation is a challenge that we face in this context. As Mark pointed out, that in some of his research, there is evidence that good policy correlates with or is associated with better experiences of youth, that inclusive anti-bullying policies are associated with a reduced risk of peer victimization for all youth. And I think that's a really important finding. We also heard in the law panel that sometimes the law can impede or hinder enforcement. Doug focused on that, particularly with the sort of concern about lawsuits, although, as he noted, the schools are actually on really strong grounds to defend those lawsuits. That still doesn't address every aspect of this sort of threat related to it. But I think it's also important to recognize that there are legal constraints associated with some policies and laws that are actually in place for very good reasons. And one area is privacy laws. There are very good reasons why we have privacy laws for students. But they do, as Will mentioned, they do create some challenges to information sharing and other things that might advance work in this area. So recognizing the constraints is an important piece of this. Last couple of thoughts on sort of the law panel. I think we actually heard a range of ways the law is being used. So not just for punishment, but that it can support training programs, that it can support, policies can support improving school culture and other sort of positive interventions. We heard that some of that comes with an unfunded mandate, and that presents challenges, of course. But that the last piece was, and this echoes what we heard elsewhere, that there's need for more research on effectiveness of laws and policies, and then we also need more research in the area of implementation. What are the barriers to successful implementation of laws and policies, and what might facilitate that?